When our country was first founded, we didn't know what to do with people with mental illnesses. So what would happen is loved ones would take their family member with serious mental illnesses and drop them off at the local jail. Unless they were wealthy and had means to bring in someone to help watch them or care for them. And it actually remained that way until the early 1800s. A wonderful woman by the name of Dorothea Dix was visiting a Boston jail, and she came across a group of 14 men who were literally freezing to death. So she went to see the jailer afterwards, and she said to him, like, who are these men? Why are they here, and why are you treating them this way? And his response was, they're not here on charges, I'm not getting paid for them, what do you want me to do? And this one woman, this one person, was so outraged at what she saw, she began a movement called, ironically, moral treatment. And the idea was to take people from these really horrible jails, but she realized that they should be put in, I shouldn't say they, people with mental illnesses should be put in small hospital settings, no larger than 120 beds, because it's a tough population. You don't want to have too many people there. It'll be easier to manage, and they could be treated more humanely. And by 1900, every state in the country had a psychiatric hospital. Now the problem began is the states. They really haven't changed in a lot of ways at certain fundamentals. And one way is money. And so what they realized is that, you know, we have thousands of people with mental illness in our state, so how can we have 10, 20, 30 small 120-bed facilities? It's inefficient, it's very expensive, it's costly. So you know what, we're going to consolidate our hospital beds. And they rounded them up, and they closed the little ones down, and they started to build these big, massive state hospitals. And I think in Ohio they had a facility that had like 10,000 patients. And the problem was there was no oversight, there was no real treatment, there was no medication, and nobody was watching what was going on. And they became these houses of horror. They became these human experimentation facilities. They started doing very rudimentary medical testing. And they found that, you know, we're talking early 1900s, they found that a lot of people with mental illnesses had slightly elevated blood sugar levels. So there was this assumption that, you know what, they all must be a bunch of diabetics. And so if we give them insulin shock, we give them big insulin shots and we shock them, we can shock them back into sanity. Well, of course they're not diabetics. It didn't work. A lot of people got sick and some people died, and they said, okay, that experiment we're going to finish. And they said, you know what, maybe we can just shock them back into sanity. So they started using electric shock therapy without any treatment, without any science, and a whole bunch more people got killed or were injured horrifically, not to mention traumatized. And then when all failed, what they did is they just cut a piece of the brain out and they did a lobotomy, and this is how they controlled people that they termed were unruly. As we got into the 1960s, there was certain enlightenment, I think, that went on as a result of the 60s. Some crazy stuff, but some good stuff too. And one of the good things that came out of the 60s is that, you know, why are we treating people with mental illnesses this way? And so what became his last public bill signing, in 1963, President Kennedy signed a $3 billion authorizing act that would have created this wonderful national network of community mental health facilities, because his sister had been lobotomized. He was very sensitive to the issue. And the first medications had come out. Thorazine came out in the late 1950s. And so the idea was that you take people from these horrible houses of horror, you put them in these small community settings, you give them Thorazine, and you case manage them, and we could all live happily ever after. Well, sadly and tragically, due to the president's assassination and the escalation of the Vietnam War, not one penny of the $3 billion ever got appropriated. It was authorized, not appropriated. When they began to create these community mental health systems, the people with the highest acuity, who are the most sick, are still in the hospitals. And so the community systems that they actually create in our communities were never set up to handle people that are that sick. But what happened is you have this horrible cost shift going on now, because the states kept closing the hospitals and sicker people kept going out into the community with less and less resources. And then the laws started to change, and we had all these sentencing guideline changes, and we started to criminalize these individuals' mental illness. There's about 2 million arrests a year of people with mental illnesses, but there's some duplication. So it's between 1 and 1.5 million people. And there's about 40,000 hospital beds left. There's about 400,000 people in jail and prisons today with serious mental illness. There's another 1.5 million on probation, okay? And so the two horrible ironies here is that, number one is we never deinstitutionalized. What we in fact did is we call it trans-institutionalization. We transferred people from these really bad, horrible, I shouldn't say this on video, but crappy hospitals to really bad, horrible, crappy jails. And the problem is that by giving them a criminal record, we've made it much, much more difficult for them to recover, because they now not only have this, the discrimination or stigma of mental illness, they have the stigma of being a criminal, and it's harder to get housing, it's harder to get employment, and there's a greater likelihood now that they're going to continue to recycle through the criminal justice system. So there's your history. It's ugly.